A sealed envelope slid across a polished oak table at Clarence House. 10 seconds later, the room stopped breathing. The Prince of Wales broke the wax, read 3 lines, went white, tried to stand, and crumpled to the floor as aides sprinted for help. Behind closed doors, a family dinner turned into the most explosive moment of the modern monarchy. This is a dramatized narrative for entertainment. The silence after the thud was the kind that makes walls listen. Catherine was at William's side in an instant, fingers at his wrist, whispering his name. King Charles signaled for the doors to be locked, his face caught between fury and fear. Across the table, Princess and pale, dry-eyed, unblinking, stood like a sentry who had done the unthinkable because duty demanded it. On the table between them lay the opened packet, the late Queen's crest, her unmistakable hand, and words meant to reset a dynasty. To understand how that letter found its way to this moment, rewind to Balmoral weeks after the state funeral, when the world had stopped and the rooms still smelled like black creep and lilies. And went north as daughter and steward, cataloguing her mother's private effects with the same discipline that has defined her life. In a rarely entered archive, she found a small plain wooden chest that didn't exist on any inventory. The key turned as if it had been waiting just for her. Inside, a neat stack of aged stationery on velvet, bound with ribbon, sealed with Er's personal cipher. The top sheet carried a line that slowed Anne's heartbeat to a thread. Confidential, for my son's eyes only. Whose son? What followed was not sentiment. It was instruction. It was revelation. And it was a blade. The first cut challenged a carefully managed myth, that the late Queen had fully embraced Camilla's path from pariah to consort. Respect, the letter said in crisp, unornamented prose, is not the same as trust. It referenced a 2005 understanding known to a tiny inner circle that if Charles married Camilla, her future styling would be princess consort, not queen, and that ceremonial scope would be limited in deference to public feeling and the crown's equilibrium. Agreements age, ambitions don't. The letter recorded, without malice but with unmistakable disappointment, how those boundaries had been worn down slowly and expertly. Alliances with senior courtiers, a soft-focus press glide, a patient normalization of Queen. The late Queen did not lash out, she simply withdrew her private assent in writing and asked for correction not from Charles, but from his successor. That alone would have rattled the gold leaf on the cornices. But the second cut, the one that buckled William, was smaller on paper and seismic in consequence. There exists an additional son. The script trembled there, as if the pen felt the weight of history. Decades earlier, under the pressure of country and crown, a discreet liaison had produced a child whose life was then kept out of the record for reasons the Queen described as necessity and fear. The chest held patient, incontrovertible paper, a birth certificate, sealed medical notes, discreet correspondence with a loyal guardian, and a single black and white photograph of a man now in late middle age, eyes like polished steel, a jawline that rhymed with portraits hanging in every British school. And read it once. Then again. The earth did not tilt, but the future did. As Princess Royal, she had been drawn into this secret years earlier when a small crisis threatened exposure. She arranged a quiet relocation, a new name, and a life far from the glare, an act of protection for the institution, not an erasure of a man. The late Queen admitted she had considered acknowledgement more than once, and more than once had flinched, fearing headlines, fearing her son's heartbreak, fearing the bomb this truth would drop into the line of succession. Under the old rules that governed most of her reign, a son born before Charles or Andrew or Edward would reorder destiny. The letter did not pretend otherwise. It did not crown an unknown. It placed the truth like a lit match in Anne's hand and said, decide. Back at Clarence House, William's collapse was not merely physical. It was years of schooling, of duty drilled into bone, of a life built on certainty suddenly made provisional. Catherine gathered him close as his chest heaved, and did not move, because moving would mean unmaking the resolve that had carried her this far. Charles told an aide to fetch a doctor and another to bring water, voice flat with command because shock had taken the color from it. No one in that room needed to read further to know that nothing beyond those walls would feel the same again. Then came the 5 days that changed everything precisely because nothing happened. William withdrew to Adelaide Cottage, and the nation, faced with a blank diary and a tightly closed gate, whispered theories into the silence. No leaks, no palace sources, no helpful friends in California, just a mote of quiet while a man took apart his life and considered which pieces to rebuild. Catherine visited, then left, then returned with the children's laughter on her coat, determined to keep the center from unraveling. And waited, as she always has, not with softness but with a steel that loves you enough to tell you the worst truth cleanly. When William reappeared, pale but anchored, his eyes had that look people get after a hurricane, nothing left on the lawn, but the house still standing because someone boarded the windows in time. He wrote 2 letters, neither to a tabloid. One went to the Prime Minister. One to the Speaker. Their contents never surfaced, which tells you everything about how serious they were. He met and privately placed the Queen's letter back on the table between them, and said, "I will carry this truth. I will not be crushed by it." It was not defiance. It was an oath. There was a meeting after that, in a house with trees thicker than paparazzi payrolls. The man from the photograph arrived without fanfare. No titles were exchanged. No bargains. 2 men who shared bone and history spoke for hours about nothing and everything, about work, about home, about the absurd fate that links strangers with the same cheekbones. When the Prince of Wales left, he pressed an envelope into the man's hand, an invitation, understated and official, to a family gathering that would happen with no cameras, no press lines, and no speeches. A door had opened, not onto a throne room, but onto recognition. Meanwhile, London hummed with normality because that is how palaces survive storms, by keeping the clock chiming. And yet, quietly, the air changed. One ceremonial duty once mapped to the Queen Consort moved elsewhere with no explanation. The court circular didn't spell it out, but everyone who needed to read the message did. Boundaries were redrawn, not vindictively, but with the sober ink of the late Queen's withdrawn assent. Catherine became the still point in the turning world. She had read the letter. She had watched her husband break and reform. "You were born to lead," she told him, "not because a chart said so, but because character does. That is the difference between a crown that sits on your head and a crown that sits in your chest." Then the last echo from the archive surfaced, tucked into a small leather pouch stamped ER, found in a Windsor vault that doesn't appear on tours. It was a tape. And listened first, because the job fell to her. The voice was soft, precise, unmistakable. "My dearest William," the Queen began, calling him her anchor to tomorrow. She spoke of the pact, of the pain, of the secret son and the burden of concealment. She did not name a new heir. She did something harder. She named a standard. "A crown," she said, "belongs to virtue before it belongs to blood." She confessed the fear that kept her from saying these things alive. She asked her grandson not for obedience but for resilience. Catherine placed the cassette in William's hand and left him alone. He listened until the tape clicked and the room was entirely still. When he finally cried, it wasn't the cry of a prince who'd lost his certainty. It was the cry of a grandson who'd been given back his grandmother, not the figure on stamps, but the woman who carried the same secret weight and chose, at the end, to speak to the only person who could carry it next. So where does this leave the kingdom? On paper, unchanged. In practice, altered forever. A letter exists. A recording exists. A man exists. Princess and holds, and has always held, a line that no court can see. King Charles rules, the Queen Consort smiles for photographs, the Prince and Princess of Wales go on shaking hands and opening hospitals. But beneath the lacquer is a new understanding, that the right to reign is tested not only by centuries and statutes, but by the quiet courage to face a truth that could swallow you whole and choose not to let it. If you made it this far, you're one of us, the viewers who value the story under the headlines. Tap like so more people find this deep dive. Drop secret letter in the comments if you'd want a part 2 exploring the political mechanics of what would, and wouldn't, change, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. In a world that lives on noise, sometimes the most royal thing you can do is keep faith and keep quiet.